from...
They feed in groups of dozens or perhaps hundreds, but here they all congregate in one place. The numbers are staggering. Over 2 million wading birds. They spend the winter alongside much more exotic species that live here all the year round, flamingos and pelicans. For years, the wintering ground of the northern waders remained unknown. It was always assumed to be on African shores, but few people imagined that it was here, right on the edge of the Sahara Desert. The birds come here to feed along a rich, fertile strip between the desert and the deep blue sea. The transition from desert to ocean is as sharp as a knife edge. The desert, virtually empty and lifeless, is washed by a sea teeming with life. These people, the Imrigan, have been fishing these waters for centuries. They used to come for a few months each year. Now they live here all year round. Their fishing techniques have remained unchanged since Portuguese explorers described them 500 years ago. But while little has altered in these rich, shallow waters over the centuries, the land has undergone a dramatic change. The Sahel, once a semi-fertile region along the whole southern edge of the Sahara, is now nearly indistinguishable from the desert itself. "20 years ago, the acacia trees and rough pasture of this area provided good grazing for game, as well as domestic stock such as camels, goats and sheep. A few acacias are still alive. They would produce leaves if it were to rain, but it hasn't rained here for 16 years. There are several possible reasons why. The destruction of the Earth's forests may have contributed to the lack of rain, causing the dry soil to blow away, leaving only sand. Or it may be that such changes are cyclical and completely natural. The huge and little-known Islamic Republic of Mauritania is bordered by Algeria and Morocco in the north, Mali to the east, and in the south by Senegal. Abel has spent his entire life here.
I remember when this area was covered in trees and there was plenty of grazing. There were ostriches, oryx, addax and gazelle. As the vegetation disappeared, the ostrich were the first to go, then the addax and oryx, and now we only see a few gazelle. All the rest have gone.
Despite the hardship, Abel believes his place is in the desert, and it is here, not in the town, that he will see out his days. The evidence of the Sahel's earlier riches litter the desert. Dorcas gazelle were once plentiful here. Among pieces of pottery lie flint arrowheads, which were once used to bring them down. In order to protect the remaining wildlife in the desert regions, as well as the birds and marine life along the coast, the government of Mauritania established a national park here in 1976. The Banque d'Arguin National Park encompasses some 5,000 square miles of marine and desert habitat. The desert areas are guarded by the Camel Patrol, who protect the few remaining Dorcas gazelle and other remnants of wildlife from poachers. The guards are part of the nomadic section of the National Army. They're an elite, a hand-picked group of men. Camels are by far the most efficient way of patrolling such a large, remote area of desert. They also serve to emphasize one of the park's aims of promoting the traditional lifestyles of the Sahara. Small lizards thrive in the heat of the Sahara. It's the larger animals that suffer. The Dorcas gazelle owe their survival here to their ability to travel huge distances to find grazing. They can obtain almost all the water they need from the leaves and tubers they find. Over half the park's 5,000 square miles is desert. Life here has to be highly adapted to survive. The moiler snake avoids the desert heat and is only active during the cooler parts of the day when it hunts for lizards and jerboas. Every so often it cleans out the sand from between its belly scales using its nose. The desert monitor is perfectly adapted to life in deserts, from West Africa to Mongolia. At almost 3 feet in length, it's a formidable predator. Despite its name, the sand fish is also a lizard, emerging from the dunes to pounce on insects such as locusts. Some desert creatures obtain their water from animal food. This mantis feeds on small spiders and insects that it can pursue at remarkable speed. Many of the park's plant species, such as this Sodom apple tree, are inedible because of their poisonous sap. But the painted lady butterfly survives by feeding on the tree's nectar, just as it does in the more familiar setting of European gardens. Without doubt, the most destructive insect in North Africa is the locust. It spells disaster for the desert. Millions upon millions of them appear as if from nowhere and devour anything edible, even the euphorbia with its poisonous sap. Around this one bush, there are over 100,000 locusts. This plant will probably survive. There's enough of it underground to produce fresh shoots. Once the locusts have completely defoliated an area, they'll move on with the next favorable winds, but not until they've laid millions of eggs, a legacy of destruction lying dormant in the sand. Many of the locusts die. Their bodies provide valuable protein and moisture for a variety of scavengers active after sunset. Darkling beetles will eat almost anything. Their powerful jaws can cut through the locust's tough skin. Scorpions hunt living prey, overpowering their victim with a sting at the tip of their tail. This species, Androctonus, despite its small size, is one of the most dangerous in Africa. The desert viper either hunts down its prey by following the scent with its sensitive tongue, or shuffles down just below the surface of the sand to lie in wait. From the sand comes a new threat, the next generation of locusts emerging from its egg pods. Few will survive, but those that do will strip the land of every green leaf. Only a stone's throw away on the other side of the dunes, the story couldn't be more different. Where the Sahara is washed by the Atlantic Ocean is one of the richest environments on the coast of Africa. The sands are covered in a lush green carpet. Here the park encompasses thousands of acres of sea grass that become exposed at low tide. Hordes of fiddler crabs emerge from their burrows to sift through the mud for food. The male only has one claw free for feeding. The other, much bigger claw is used as a signal to his fellow crabs. But unlike the locusts in the desert, these swarms don't spell death and destruction. They're an indication of the amazing richness of the environment. Such richness is due to a curious phenomenon known as upwelling that occurs just off the coast. The hot, dry Saharan winds blow to the west over the Atlantic, pushing the surface waters out to sea. Cold, nutrient-rich waters well up from the depths to take their place, promoting a wealth of plant and planktonic life, the basis of the marine food chain. The sea rarely exceeds 15 feet in depth, so the waters soon warm up in the sun. Few animals eat the seagrass, or zostera, but a large number come here to feed on the life in, on, and under it, and fish migrate here to spawn in it. The mud is heaving with mollusks, such as clams and cone shells. It's these mudflats and eelgrass beds that attract wading birds here for the winter. The only way 2 million birds can live and feed in the same place is by exploiting different parts of the environment. Each bird species has its own special prey and a beak adapted to catch it. The dunlin feeds on worms and mollusks just below the mud surface, while the bar-tailed godwit probes deeper. The whimbrel preys on fiddler crabs, breaking off their limbs and then swallowing body and legs separately. The spoonbill probes the shallow waters for small fish and crustaceans, detecting and catching them with the bill that gives it its name. Although spoonbills feed in the shallows just off the shore, they roost and breed on some of the tiny remote islands that are dotted throughout the Banc d'Arguin National Park. They steal each other's nesting material, which inevitably leads to disputes. Their breeding season extends from March to October. During the winter, the local birds are joined by migrants from Holland and Spain. Chicks are fed on regurgitated food from their parents' beak. Their spoon-shaped bills will develop as they grow. They'll need them. Life for an adult spoonbill seems to be one long dispute. Birds gather here to nest during late April and May. Their numbers fluctuate from year to year. A single egg is laid on top of a small mound that's built up by the adult as it sits on the nest. Early morning finds the colony restless, the birds shuffling and flapping. Some birds have yet to pair up. They're already out on the sand, parading up and down. The males are larger than the females. They sway their heads as they march along as part of the courtship ritual. Wing flashing by the males reveals their red markings, an indication of their general condition and potential as a mate. The only trees that can thrive in this part of Mauritania grow in the sea. Just off the Sahara coast, in the center of the park, is a tiny relict area of mangrove. They're the northernmost mangrove trees on the coast of Africa, and they rarely exceed 6 feet in height. Among their aerial roots on the mudflats lives a tiny amphibious fish, the mudskipper. It's about the size of a man's thumb, and it feeds by swallowing large mouthfuls of mud and ejecting the non-edible parts. Above the mudskippers, in the branches of the mangroves, are over 2,000 nests of the African cormorant, a marine bird living in a marine environment and nesting in a marine tree. The nests are made of twigs and seagrass held together by guano. The chicks are almost fully fledged, and they'll be leaving the nests within a week or so. An eerie sound greets the Saharan dawn. It's milking time for the camels in the nomad camp, and the camels, true to their obstinate nature, are complaining bitterly. Many have young, but only when they've been milked will they be allowed to suckle the calves. But the milk yield is only a fraction of its potential. The land is already overgrazed, and now it's been devastated by locusts. The wells provide precious water, and the nomads are reluctant to move too far away from them. This places greater pressure on the local environment for grazing and wood. In the past, they travelled more widely, surviving between waterholes on rainwater and the ample milk provided by their herds. Each year, the wells have to be dug deeper. This one is already, as the nomads would tell you, as deep as the height of 18 men, 90 feet. The water is cool, but slightly saline, and it's the only source for many miles around. During the middle of the day, temperatures soar to over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. It's impossible to spend more than a few minutes in the open. The nomads while away their time playing a sort of desert draughts. The draftsmen are whatever is readily available, and it's not much, usually twigs and camel droppings. During the 1970s, tens of thousands of nomads quit their herds and way of life and moved to the towns in the north to work on the extraction of iron ore. The ore is moved to the coast by the world's longest train. Five engines pull a column of trucks that stretches for over 1.5 miles. But in the late 70s, the price of iron ore dropped dramatically, and thousands of nomads were left unemployed and crowded together in huge shanty towns. Their herds gone, it was impossible for them to move back to the desert, which in any case had become increasingly hostile for man and wildlife alike. The seeds, lying dormant for years in the earth, ready to burst into life at the onset of the first good downpour, are gradually becoming swamped by waves of drifting dunes. Those creatures that aren't reliant on fresh water or plant life are still thriving. The small islands dotted around the waters of the Banc d'Arguin National Park are ideal nesting sites for tens of thousands of local seabirds. Their teeming presence provides an increasing contrast to the desert beyond. A pair of royal terns perform their courtship dance on the beach. Once the pair bond is established, the birds will remain together for the rest of the season, perhaps even for life, which could be as long as 15 or 20 years. This one has died in what resembles a submissive posture. On receiving the signal, the other birds are eager to reinforce their dominance. Royal terns roost in a tightly bunched colony. 1,000 eyes are better than 2. This egg is from the abandoned nest of a Caspian tern, a close relative of the royal. Slender-billed gulls are not usually known as egg or chick thieves. They normally feed only on fish and invertebrates. Turnstones, so familiar in Europe, may spend the winter scavenging the eggs of tropical birds. Outside the breeding colony, pair bonds are still being formed. A potential mate is offered fish by two male suitors. Accepting the food is usually a sign of accepting the mate. The royal terns breed on a higher part of the island. This reduces the risk of their nests being flooded out by even the highest tides. The nests are tightly bunched together, as many as 9 per square yard. Egg-laying and hatching is closely synchronized throughout the colony. It's a common strategy against predators. If the colony were raided, there would be a huge number of chicks available all at once, so it's unlikely they'd all be eaten. Anyway, it would take a bold predator to run the gauntlet of all these large, sharp beaks at once. Both parents brood the single chick, and both catch fish and crabs to feed it. It will stay with at least one of its parents for as long as 8 months, while it learns to catch food for itself. On another desert island, Grand Kiaun, some 14 miles away, a close relative of the royal tern is also in the process of rearing a family. The Caspian tern is the largest of all terns, readily distinguished from the royal by its bright red beak. Unlike the nests of their cousins, those of the Caspian tern are well spaced out within the colony. There's a lot of aggression and rivalry between the birds. Caspian terns usually lay 2 or 3 eggs in a shallow scrape in the loose earth. Ground temperatures can reach over 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and while the chicks are left unshaded by their parents, they have to pant vigorously to keep cool. The breeding of Caspian terns isn't synchronized, so within the colony at any one time there are large and small chicks as well as eggs. If a chick wanders out of its own nest territory, it will be given a hard time by the other birds. The supply of small fish and other food within the park is almost limitless. Many species of bird take advantage of the bounty. Although it eats unattended eggs, the slender-billed gull feeds its chicks on regurgitated fish, unlike the terns, which use fresh fish. Here, on the neighbouring island of Zira, the gulls breed in small groups of about 30 nests. The groups may be up to 150 feet apart, and the whole colony numbers over 1,000 pairs, the largest on the African coast. Such large congregations of birds can only occur when there is an abundance of fish. Until now, there's always been plenty for both the birds and the fishermen. The entire population of about 500 Imrigan fishermen live in 7 small villages within the park. They have to catch enough fish to feed themselves and to trade for essentials such as rice, goats, and water. There's no fresh water at all in the village of Iwik. The Imrigan collected rainwater at one time, but since the drought they've had to buy all their water from Nouadhibou in the north or from Nouakchott in the south, a round trip of 200 miles by sea. The Imrigan have little experience as boat menders, and most of their launches, bought from the Canary Islands many years ago, are rotting. Today is a big day for the residents of Ewick. They're relaunching a boat that's been lying idle for many years. The whole village turns out to lend a hand. Once it's rigged, the boat will increase their fleet to 6. Sharks are caught in gill nets which drown them by preventing them from moving. By taking both predatory and prey fish, the Imrigan have inadvertently kept a balance in these waters. A 10-foot tiger shark is a formidable killer. As well as the tigers, they regularly catch milk sharks and hammerheads. The flesh is dried and may eventually find its way to restaurants in Japan. On almost every day of the year, the village is festooned with drying fish. No other people on Earth have such a large proportion of fish protein in their diet. After a few weeks, the heaps of dried flesh and fins are traded at market for rice, the occasional goat, water, and these days medicines and batteries for the radios. It's one of the few occasions when the Imrigan have any direct contact with the outside world. It's been estimated that together they take only about 1,000 tons of fish per year. Outside the park, the story is very different. The harbour at Mauritania's major port, Nouadhibou, is filled with dozens of huge fishing vessels, and there are more out at sea. Since the iron ore market collapsed, fishing has become the main source of foreign income for Mauritania. 60% of the country's revenue comes from the sale of fishing rights. Almost everything has a market. Cockles are dredged up from the seabed by the ton. Almost all of them will be exported. Fish of every shape and size, octopus, prawns, crayfish and squid are caught and frozen. Few of them will be eaten locally. The official catch for 1987 was 720,000 tons of open water fish and 120,000 tons of bottom-living fish. The real figures were probably much higher, perhaps even double. Although over the past few years there has been little noticeable change in the total weight of fish caught, the size of the individual fish is getting smaller. A decrease in size is one of the first signs of overfishing. Commercial fishing vessels are not allowed to operate within the boundaries of the Banc d'Arguin Park, but many of the smaller boats ignore this regulation. There is increasing financial pressure on the government to set aside areas of the park for commercial fishing. This could have a catastrophic effect, not only on the fish, but on the birds and the immigrant people themselves. Ships have come here to fish from all over the world. Mauritania, one of the poorest countries in Africa, is desperate for foreign aid. The pressure to give way to the fishing interests is intense. The boats are often among the oldest still working. Many break down or are deliberately beached for a variety of reasons, like insurance. Very few founder accidentally. The result is a coastline that's littered with wrecks. Nowhere else on Earth is there such a concentration of stranded vessels. The local people seem quite oblivious to them, even though wood is always in short supply here and could easily be salvaged. Even the wildlife isn't deterred. Grey herons use the old wrecks as vantage points for fishing. But like the majority of birds in the park, they rely on remote barren islands such as Arid for nesting. There's no vegetation or cover of any sort. The herons use whatever they can find to build their nests. Usually it's a pile of pelican bones. In this heat, it's important for them to shade their eggs. The park's colony of white pelicans nests on the other side of the island, a few hundred yards away. Pelicans feed their chicks by regurgitation, but the chick has to work for its meal, diving right down into its parent's throat. It looks distinctly uncomfortable for both parties. But it's very effective. The chicks grow rapidly, and there's certainly no waste. Many of the larger youngsters are losing their fluffy brown chick feathers, and some can already fly. They'll soon be joining their parents on fishing trips. In the meantime, their muscles need all the exercise they can get. When they're adult, their wingspan will be nearly 10 feet. The huge number and variety of birds here, both resident breeders and winter migrants, is a spectacular indication of the richness of the Bank d'Arguin National Park. Yet to the Imrigan, the flocks are only of passing interest. They never take birds or eggs to supplement their monotonous diet of fish. But there's one mammal living in the park that the fishermen actually work with. The association was first reported by Portuguese sailors 500 years ago. It's seen only at Cap Timorous, close to the southern boundary of the park. It's the second half of November, the time of peak activity among the shoals of mullet that migrate along the shores. The immigrants spend days looking out to sea, waiting for signs of fish. The whole village turns out to take part in a unique act of cooperation between humans and wild animals. When they see the shoals, the fishermen begin to beat the water with sticks. The noise attracts a pod of dolphins cruising offshore. As the dolphins approach, the mallets scatter. Many of them swim towards the shore in an effort to escape. The fishermen and dolphins are now on either side of the mallet, and the catching can begin. The immigrants spread out their nets. Within minutes, they're almost full. The dolphins benefit by catching fish panicked or injured during the confusion. The pod of dolphins here is one of the largest on the coast, almost 100 strong. Most of them are common dolphins, but there are also a few of the rarer Senegal river dolphins with their curious humped back. Between them, the men and the dolphins catch so many fish that even a man who's completely blind returns with his nets full. The shoals may or may not pass again during the next week, but the fishermen have already caught enough to see them through the next few months. Some of the catch will be eaten fresh, but most of it will be dried in the sun. Now, after at least 500 years, this unique spectacle, like many aspects of life within the park, is threatened. The Mauritanian Ministry of Fisheries and Maritime Economy is looking for new ways to exploit the park's rich resources. Their list of proposals makes startling reading. One suggestion is that the Imrigan should be equipped with power boats and freezer stations to make their activities more efficient, something the Imrigan themselves resist. Another proposes that all the Imrigan in the park should be moved here, to Cape Timorous. Commercial fishing may soon be allowed in certain designated areas within the park. This could open up the floodgates to foreign fleets. There are also plans to extract seagrass and algae from the shallow waters to provide fertilizer. Perhaps the most startling proposal is that a US naval base be built here. That would certainly mean an end to the dolphin-assisted fishing and much else as well. Mauritania needs to exploit its limited resources to survive. But unless it does so with an eye to the future, the Bank d'Arguin National Park, West Africa's most important spawning ground for fish and wintering ground for birds, may be lost forever.
More wildlife in the shadow of the whale at the same time next week.